Japan's most banned anime. With a nickname like that, you just know it's gotta be freaking crazy, right? After hearing all of the hype surrounding Shoujo Tsubaki, when I was told to actually go and watch the movie, I thought I was in for some crazy gore-infested animation, but after the movie was over, I gotta admit I was a little bit moved. For those that don't know anything about Shoujo Tsubaki, otherwise known as Midori, basically it's a movie that came out in 1992 and it's gained a ton of hype and a lot of bad media press because of how disturbing and gory some of the scenes can be. The basic synopsis that you'll find on Google if you search it up is as follows. An orphan girl is raped and abused after she joins a freak show circus. And although that's pretty damn accurate as to what actually happens in the movie, I don't think it tells the entire story behind the movie. And in fact, I feel like whenever anyone covers it or summarizes the movie, they just highlight and talk about all the disgusting scenes that are in it, and they don't go any further beyond that. But I want to do things a little bit different. Obviously, I'm going to be giving a summary towards the middle or end of this video, about all the crazy things that happen in the movie. But before we get there, I feel like we need to understand why the movie was made. And in order to understand the intentions behind why it was made, we have to talk about these two people, Suehiro Maruo and Hiroshi Harada. Suehiro Maruo is the man that created the source material for Shoujo Tsubaki, which came in the form of this manga titled Mr. Arashi's Amazing Freak Show. At some point in his life, Hiroshi Harada actually came in contact with this book and it left a lasting mark on him. It spoke to him so much that he would dedicate the next half decade of his life to not only creating the anime adaptation of the work, but he'd literally do everything. Hand drawing all the animations, getting all the funding for the movie, and actually putting it out in theaters himself. There's even an interview that I'm going to be referring to throughout this entire video titled One Man Band, and it's an interview that the creator did and put onto the DVD for Shoujo Tsubaki when it was released. Now, I've already gone ahead and watched the entire 20-minute interview, but for those that are super curious, I will leave a link to it below, but I will be going over all of the important points in this video. So there's a few main points that I want to take away from this entire interview and from the entire ordeal that is Shoujo Tsubaki. There's no better place to start talking about why this was made than the original manga and the original source material, Mr. Arashi's Amazing Freak Show. The original manga is based on actual events that Maruo saw in his life, or at least was told happened in his life. It's a little unclear, but he does claim to have at least witnessed these crimes happen in front of him. This is known to us, the viewer, because Harada actually explains in that interview that before he made the adaptation of Shoujo Tsubaki, he actually went ahead and interviewed Maruo himself. He did this to get some insight on the original work, and to his surprise, he found out from Maruo that the work was based on real events. And Harada even admits in that interview that this small detail really disturbed him because he wasn't expecting that. A lot of people that got a hold of the original manga didn't realize that this was actually based on real things that Suehiro dealt with. So if you guys go watch the movie after this for whatever reason, just keep that in mind that this is based on loosely true events. The next big point I need to touch on is that Harada was extremely passionate about adapting Mr. Arashi's Amazing Freak Show into a full-length feature film, not because he was a pervert, but because he felt the original source material really spoke to him as a person. He explained that when he was little, he actually went and saw the circus as a child, and it was the first time he'd ever seen anyone with these types of deformities and abnormalities. Apparently, this had a profound effect on him as a child, as when he grew up, he slowly began to only enjoy stories about imperfect people. The way that Harada puts it in his own words is that he feels the mainstream media only shows stories about beautiful people, people that are physically attractive and that people want to hear about. Imperfect people are kind of shoved to the side, which is why he wanted them to be at the forefront of his work. He even states that he got bullied as a child for having a stomach disability, and this is exemplified in Harada's other work. He has another movie known as The Death Lullaby, which we'll go in depth on a lot later in this video because it ties into Shoujo Tsubaki. But for right now, all you need to know about Death Lullaby is it's a film all based around a young boy that essentially just deals with being bullied constantly by his classmates and shunned by all of the adults in his life. Hopefully it's starting to make a little bit more sense now, but the reason that Harada painstakingly took 5 years of his life to create a animation adaptation of Mr. Arashi's Freak Show was because he wanted something in the mainstream media that he felt he was represented by. He wanted to bring attention to more dark issues that he felt were just kind of shoved under the rug in Japanese culture. He even explains in the interview that movies from Hayao Miyazaki are seen as representations of Japan's lifestyle, and that if this is the case, then his work should be seen as a counterpoint to that idea, representing the dark underbelly of what goes on in his homeland. Now, I will admit, I'll give a little leeway to those people that are, a little skeptic about it. It is a little hard to believe that someone was just that passionate about creating a work like this into an adaptation just because they were touched by it. So I will give a little leeway. It is still a little bit weird, but I've been passionate like that in my life before, so I can buy it, but I'm sure that some people out there will believe that he's still just a pervert for making this in the first place. So knowing all of that context, let's get into the nitty-gritty of Shoujo Tsubaki. Now, it's at this point I'm going to give you guys a fair warning. If you guys do not do good with any of the topics listed on the side here, please do not continue watching this video. We will be going over themes considering child exploitation, assault, anything that has to do with animal cruelty. Just if you guys don't do good with any of the topics listed on screen right now, please just click off of the video. It is not going to be a good time for you, I promise. Okay, if you're still here, let's talk about Shoujo Tsubaki. This film starts in the 1920s as we are introduced to the protagonist of this rather disturbing story, Midori, a 12-year-old girl that sells flowers on the street to make money. This is also where the name the Camellia Girl comes into play. If you translate Shoujo Tsubaki directly into English, it translates to the Camellia Girl. So she sells flowers to make money since her family is poor, with her mom sick and her dad gone. One day while selling her flowers, she meets this old man that ends up being an absolute creep. She complains to the man that she hasn't sold any flowers, to which the guy replies that he will buy all of her flowers from her, so long as she promises to come find him if she ever needs help. Coincidentally, that same night, when she returns home, she finds her bedridden mother and is surprised to see that she has passed away, and the cause of her death, eaten alive by rats. I'm showing a somewhat blurred image of the scene on screen, but honestly, even with it blurred, you guys get the point. It's absolutely vile and disgusting, and this movie shows it all. Now, because Midori has nowhere else to go, she decides to go to the address that the man gave her, and this is where the entire movie starts really showing its true colors. Right from the get-go, the entire fairground crew begins just being really creepy, questioning where she came from, why is she there, and constantly noting how beautiful and pretty she is. Immediately after this, like literally no more than 30 seconds after we've been introduced to the entire fairground crew, we get an image that flies across the screen of one of the fairground people with his head underneath her dress doing, yeah. We also get pictures of her being seemingly manhandled by everyone in the fairground crew. It's honestly super gross, and in my opinion, this image that you're seeing on screen is probably the tamest disturbing image in the entire movie. Now, there's a few traumatic experiences that Midori goes through over the course of the next 5 minutes of the film, so there's going to be 4 big incidents in total. The first is a scene with her seeing a chicken with its head cut off, and then presumably she is fed said chicken. It's kind of unclear. I took it as them feeding it to her, but the scene just cuts from showing the chicken head to her throwing up on the ground. So I'm just assuming they made her eat it, but you don't really see that on screen. And even after this happens, the fairground crew resumes berating and harassing her and explains that she needs to be tougher than that to work in their industry. The second incident is her waking up to the fairground crew engaging in adult behavior with one another. Basically, one woman is naked and there's 2 guys doing stuff to her. Midori sees this and is obviously scared, especially when one of the guys asks her to join them. The woman then quickly refutes this, saying that Midori wouldn't be as good as her. A frightened Midori runs away from the entire scene, and then she sees yet another fairground woman being touched by another one of the men. Now, this part was a little bit more disturbing to me, and I'm going to be zooming in on the part I'm talking about because I don't want to get striked for having inappropriate stuff. But you can see the guy just straight up licking the girl's eyeball, and it's super gross. And I don't know what it is, but this one really creeped me out for some reason. Even earlier, the earlier frame where they're licking her eye, Something about that just freaking grossed me out. I know there's worse things in the movie that happen, but these two just really bothered me for some reason. The third incident occurs when one of the women sees Midori enjoying her time taking care of these puppies that she found. And when Midori leaves the puppies to go do her other jobs, the woman walks up to the puppies and, just brutally kills them. It's an absolutely brutal scene, and this is honestly enough to make most people turn off the movie in its entirety. I obviously toughed through it for the video, but I don't even know if I would have done that had I not been watching it for sake of making a video on it. Seriously, the animation is extremely detailed, so if you guys go watch the movie after this, just be warned when that scene is coming up, it does show like everything. Now that part disturbed me quite a lot, not just because, it's obviously puppies being mercilessly killed, but it's mostly because this is one part of the movie that's just done out of pure hatred. At least the other scenes where like Midori is somewhat exploited, there's almost a weird, sick, twisted bond between the fairground crew that they're trying to make with Midori. So I can kind of understand the motive as to why they're doing it. But this girl just straight up does this out of pure hatred. There's no reason for her to go and do this besides to mess with Midori and, pretty much traumatize her. So I found this part a lot more disturbing than a lot of the other things that happen in this movie. After this entire scene passes, we cut to the group and Midori enjoying a stew, and it's brought up that the stew is made of the dogs from earlier, further traumatizing Midori. Now some time passes and then we see Midori watching a train pass by, hoping to one day escape the nightmare that she's living in. It's at this point that one of the fairground members sees this and tells her that she will never leave. Presumably that same night, she is attacked and assaulted by another member of the crew in a very unsettling depiction of this type of assault. Now, because of how abstract this movie can be after this point, I'm not going to be explaining in absolute detail what happens in each scene, but just note that there's a lot of parts in the movie in between these incidents where it seems like Midori is just hallucinating or having like extremely feverish nightmares. And that's what happens after this scene. Midori ends up having more traumatic experiences with the fairground crew, which leads to more nightmares, and then she wakes up and has more experiences with them, and you kind of get the point. We finally get some actual plot in the movie when we get word that the freak show circus is actually losing money. Following this, we see another scene of Midori wanting to leave with the train, and then we get back to the plot again, where we see that to fix the problem of the circus losing money, they bring in a man named Wonder Masamitsu, a magician that can do real magic. In a sick twist of events, he ends up taking a liking to Midori, and we get some just vile scenes of them making out. It's really gross when you take into account the age of these people, so I'm not going to say anything more here, but you guys kind of get what the hell's going on. And within minutes of this character being introduced, they straight up just get married to each other. And that's very clear throughout the movie and from this point on that Midori is being manipulated into this relationship, because now that she has this real magical power to back her up, she finally feels that she can stand up to all of the people at the fairgrounds. Her new husband makes her the assistant in his magic show, and all seems somewhat normal for a little bit. The show goes great, the fair is profitable again, and Midori is being protected by Masamitsu whenever they mess with her. So, in a rather, sick, twisted way, Midori's actually happy for a little bit in the film. However, things take yet another dark turn when this mummy guy who assaulted her tries to make amends for what he did, apologizing to her and explaining that he's in love with her. Masamitsu sees this and in a fit of rage, kills him by sinking him into quicksand. Afterwards, the mummy and the magician return, and obviously this guy's dead, with Midori basically putting two and two together, realizing that her husband is the one that murdered him, which leads to Midori being frightened and running away from the man that she married. The magician runs after her, reassuring her that the guy was a bad influence and deserved it. Some time passes, and then one day, a man from a movie studio comes to the fairground and asks Midori to be in his movie. He has plans to make her a famous movie star and gives her his card. Masamitsu intervenes by ripping up the business card and exclaiming that only he must think of her future, causing Midori to become depressed and angry at Masamitsu for ruining her opportunity. He becomes increasingly frustrated when he finds the ripped up card put back together by Midori, and this leads to this horrific scene. Masamitsu is on stage performing and is being berated by the audience to get on with his show. His frustration from earlier is on full display as he begins throwing insults at the people watching and even starts morphing and changing everyone into the audience into these unrecognizable blobs of people. Some being exploded from the inside out, others being merged into big monsters, and the rest of them just being outright obliterated by his magic. For the next 3 minutes or so, it's just an on-screen gore fest, all done by Masamitsu. Because of how much magic he used during his performance, it takes quite the toll on him. He is seemingly hospitalized and then decides to resign from the circus, presumably to be with Midori. She asks him to go home, and then we cut to the final minutes of this movie. Within the last 10 minutes of the movie, Masamitsu, from what I can make of it, puts visions in her head of what life would be like if her mother and father were still alive. It's honestly quite a heartwarming moment as she just sits with her family and has dinner together. This is then interrupted by the magician asking her to leave with him, to which she replies yes. Then it's revealed that the owner of the circus has run off, causing everyone to think about leaving. Midori and Masamitsu finally leave and, oddly enough, are given a nice farewell by everyone at the fairground. As they are leaving, the magician tells Midori to wait at this bus stop area so he can go get some food for them. In the midst of him getting the food, he is stabbed to death by a random thief on the street, causing Midori to end up in this very hallucinogenic ending scene. She runs around the area she's in desperately trying to find Masamitsu, but keeps ending up at the same locations that she's already been to, running around in an endless loop a few times, and then finally a break in the loop happens where she gets a stick and runs at all of the fairground people who are now laughing at her. They all disappear into nothingness as Midori is left there all alone in the white void, with the last scene being this lone shot of Midori followed by a cry for help. And that is Shoujo Tsubaki. Now, what the hell does all of this mean? If I'm being honest, some of this movie can feel like an absolute fever dream, and to tell you the truth, when I first watched it, I really didn't know what to make of it. It wasn't until I later researched Hiroshi Harada that I really started to understand why this film was made in the first place. Or at the very least, why it spoke to Harada during that time in his life when he saw the original manga. I mentioned this earlier, but there is another movie that Hiroshi Harada made by the name of The Death Lullaby, which if you want to know more about, watch my next Disturbing Media volume as it's going to be on there. But for right now, the basic synopsis of the movie is it's about a child that is constantly bullied by tons of other more powerful characters, like straight up beaten to a bloody pulp and is overall just defenseless. This movie was made in 1985, and the reason he made it is because he suffered from terrible bullying all of his life. He went from being bullied in elementary school to being bullied in middle school, forcing him to change schools by the time he reached high school. Death Lullaby is an homage to his experience as a child, living as a non-violent person in an absolutely violent world. He sought to make a film that would encourage discussion on this type of behavior that seemed to be prevalent in his hometown of Gunma, Japan. And this isn't me talking for the guy. There's another interview that he did about The Death Lullaby where he explains all of this. He even ended off that interview stating, "How can we make a society where humans live peacefully and humanly?" And this movie, The Death Lullaby, should be seen as a main motivator to get there. If we take the sole purpose behind creating Death Lullaby and apply it to Shoujo Tsubaki, it begins to make a lot more sense as to why the original source material for the movie spoke to Harada in the way that it did. Mr. Arashi's amazing freak show depicted a defenseless girl that had every single good thing in her life ripped away from her. Not only was she abused throughout her young adolescence, but it ruined her so much that when a clearly manipulative and terrible man showed up in her life, she thought he was just amazing, only because he didn't really physically assault her from the very get-go. In the entire movie, we see Midori absolutely struggle with the notion of wanting to leave. We periodically see these scenes where she just looks at the train chugging on by, hoping to hop on one day and escape the hell that she's in, only for her to fall victim to her traumatic experiences, leading to this horrific ending where, when she confronts them, she's left with nothing but a never-ending void. Obviously, that's just my interpretation of the film, Another huge point that I wanted to touch on regarding the film was the idea of counterculture that's seen throughout the entire thing. As I stated before, it's been admitted in that interview with Harada that the movie was made to represent the idea of going against the mainstream. In fact, it's for this reason that he self-funded the movie, created over 5,000 sheets of hand-drawn animation, raised all of the money for the film himself, all because no one would fund the film without forcing heavy censorship on it. This is pretty wild to think about because even after creating the controversial piece of work that we see today, it was still censored in 1994 when it was screened by the Eirin Censorship Board in Japan. And while we're talking about censorship, I wanted to touch on the fact that the movie itself was never actually banned. It's been given the name Japan's most banned anime just due to the public's special ability to always blow things way out of proportion. It was merely censored because of the current state of culture in Japan during that time. The movie as a whole was created to be a polar opposite of what was currently the most popular animation in Japan, which is obviously any work done by Hayao Miyazaki. Miyazaki's films are almost seen as a representation of what Japan has to offer. Many people love the movies for that reason. And I know each film has their own world building and are vastly different from each other, but Harada saw Miyazaki's work as what Japan wishes it was like, what they want to be seen as. And Harada explains that if this is the case, his work should be seen as what Japan wishes to hide from the masses, a depiction of the dark underbelly of Japanese society, the lack of understanding for those going through mental health issues due to traumatic experiences that have happened in their life. After all, Mr. Arashi's Amazing Freak Show was even based on actual events that Suehiro Maruo claims to have knowledge of, and the absolute zero remorse that we see in the characters is a reflection of what Harada believes happened to him as a child. It feels as though no one has remorse for what they've done to Midori, as Harada feels no one has remorse to what was done to him. And this isn't even the first Japanese person to touch on this subject matter and try to apply it to a more mainstream audience. In 1948, a Japanese novel by the name of No Longer Human did much of the same by showcasing the effects that traumatic life experiences can have on someone without proper help. Now that book is way more intense, especially considering the fate that the author had at the end of the entire thing, but I felt that it was relevant to the point I was trying to make about how the culture in Japan just doesn't promote good mental health awareness. It's well known, at least from what I've seen on the internet and that I've digested myself, that Japan has been behind on its entire mental health sector for a while now, with the extreme work conditions and insane culture that goes on in everyday living. That's not to say that everyone in Japan is depressed or that living there is awful, but I'm simply pointing out that Shoujo Tsubaki was not created to simply showcase a very disgusting depiction of child exploitation and be a sick fantasy for perverts. It was meant to bring awareness to these topics and hopefully spark conversation over them, which is why I even bothered making this video in the first place. That's going to end today's little history lesson and analysis on Shoujo Tsubaki. If you guys want me to go over any other extreme, disturbing, or anything weird like that, even No Longer Human, which I probably will end up making a video on in the future anyways, let me know if you guys would be interested in seeing anything like that in the future, as I'd love sharing my insight on anything that piques my interest. Now, we can't end off today's video without the Patreon shoutout. Thanks to everyone that has joined the Patreon. We have around 4 members now. So if you guys haven't joined already, go ahead and go on there. You guys are going to be getting 1-day early access to all my videos if you do the 2nd tier or higher. And if you want some exclusive behind the scenes content, you can also subscribe to the highest tier that I have available. So go check that out if you guys want to support me on Patreon and keep getting this quality content onto the channel. Now, with all of that said, I will see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.